Osama bin Laden was once the most wanted man in the world. A pivotal role in orchestrating the September 11th attacks in 2001, an event that shook the world to its core. For many, he became a symbol of terror, associated with violence, and the spread of radical ideologies. His name became synonymous with evil in the eyes of millions. However, behind this notorious figure, there was another side that most people rarely saw. A man who was also a husband and a father, someone who, for many years, maintained a family life with 4 wives and at least 20 children. For these women, life with bin Laden was far from the horrific image the world had of him. The reality they faced was one of isolation, fear, and an unimaginable existence under extreme conditions, far removed from the life of luxury they might have once known. At the center of this hidden world was Najwa Ghanem, Osama bin Laden's first wife. She was born in 1960 in Syria, in a coastal city called Latakia. Najwa grew up in a peaceful and beautiful environment, surrounded by fruit trees and vegetable gardens, with her father working as a merchant and her mother as a housewife. She had a large, close-knit family, and as a young girl, she enjoyed playing tennis, riding her bicycle, and drawing. Her life was ordinary and simple, filled with dreams of a happy, peaceful future. But fate had different plans for her. Najwa never imagined that one day she would become married to the man who would go on to become the most feared terrorist in modern history. Najwa's path to Osama bin Laden wasn't one of chance. It was one that started with their shared family background. Bin Laden and Najwa were cousins. Osama's father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a wealthy and powerful businessman in Saudi Arabia, and the bin Laden family was extremely influential. Mohammed was a close friend of King Abdulaziz Al Saud, and the family owned a massive construction empire, the Saudi bin Laden Group, which had direct ties to the Saudi royal family. Despite this immense wealth, Osama's upbringing wasn't exactly luxurious. His parents divorced when he was young, and he lived with his mother and stepfather. He went on to attend King Abdulaziz University, where he focused more on religious studies than business. Meanwhile, Najwa was living a life filled with dreams of a bright future, and she couldn't have known that her future would be forever entwined with the man who would become the world's most infamous figure. The couple eventually married, and Najwa gave birth to 11 children with Osama. But over the years, the man she married transformed into someone unrecognizable, someone whose beliefs and actions would lead them all down a path of suffering and fear. In the early years of their marriage, life was not as harsh as it would later become. They lived a relatively quiet life, far removed from the extreme violence that would later define bin Laden's legacy. But as Osama's radical views took shape, life for his wives became a nightmare. Osama's belief in extreme interpretations of Islam led him to impose unbearable hardships on those closest to him. One chilling example of this was when Osama forced all 4 of his wives to spend an entire night alone in the desert, a harsh and unforgiving place. The women were ordered to survive in the wild, each spending the night in separate dirt holes. The freezing cold of the desert night was unforgiving, and the women had to cover themselves with dirt and grass just to stay warm. For Osama, this was a test of resilience. For his wives, it was an act of pure suffering. Najwa, as the first wife, endured many of these trials, but it wasn't long before cracks began to form in her marriage. Her second eldest son grew up to be someone who wanted nothing to do with his father's extremist ideology. Osama's son Omar was kind-hearted, loved animals, and rejected the violent path his father had chosen. This created a rift between them, with Osama desperately hoping his son would follow in his footsteps, but Omar had other plans. As a result, Osama became disappointed with his eldest son and began to feel isolated as his family slipped away from him. Najwa and her children were soon forced to leave Sudan when the United States and Saudi Arabia pressured the Sudanese government to expel Osama due to his increasing terrorist activities. Stripped of his citizenship and assets, Osama fled to Afghanistan with his family in tow. The once wealthy family found themselves in an entirely different world, a remote, freezing mountain in the Tora Bora region of Afghanistan. For a family that had once lived in luxury, this new life was one of hardship and deprivation. There was no electricity, no running water, and barely enough food to survive. The children were often hungry, and for Najwa, who was pregnant with her 10th child, the conditions were unbearable.